Welcome, thrill seekers, to a world of spine-chilling tales and hair-raising adventures. Gather around for a frightful journey into the unknown as we delve deep into the realm of scary stories. Buckle up, hold on tight, and get ready to experience a rush of terror like never before. The cabin in the woods had been a family getaway for generations. It was the perfect place to escape the hustle and bustle of everyday life and reconnect with nature. But when the Smith family arrived for their annual vacation, they had no idea that this year's trip would be anything but relaxing. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by towering trees and the peaceful sounds of nature. The Smiths spent their first day exploring the area, hiking through the forest and fishing in the nearby lake. But that night, strange things began to happen. The family gathered around the fireplace, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories. But when they tried to turn in for the night, they found that their bedrooms had been ransacked. Clothes were strewn about the room, and valuable items were missing. They brushed it off as a strange coincidence, assuming that they had simply forgotten to lock the doors. But the next day, things only got worse. When they returned from a morning hike, they found that their car had been vandalized, with scratches and dents marring the once pristine paint job. The family started to feel uneasy, but they tried to ignore their fears and continue their vacation as planned. That night, they gathered around the dinner table, still discussing the strange occurrences. But as they ate, they noticed a strange smell in the air. It was musty and damp, like the smell of an old basement. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. The family scrambled for flashlights and candles, but they could hear strange noises coming from outside the cabin. It sounded like footsteps, and they seemed to be getting closer and closer. The Smiths huddled together, fear taking hold of them. They tried to call for help, but their phones had no signal. They were completely cut off from the outside world. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noises stopped. The power came back on, and the family breathed a sigh of relief. But when they went to bed that night, they knew that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, the youngest member of the family, little Timmy, was missing. The Smiths searched the cabin and the surrounding woods, but there was no sign of the boy. They called the police, but the nearest station was miles away, and it would take hours for help to arrive. As they waited for the authorities, the family noticed that more and more items were missing from the cabin. Food, clothing, and even the family's hunting rifles were gone. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no sign of Timmy. The family started to turn on each other, suspecting that one of them had something to do with the disappearance. But as time went on, they realized that there was something much darker at play. One night, they heard strange chanting coming from the woods. It was eerie and unsettling, and it seemed to be coming from all around them. The family huddled together in terror, wondering what could be causing the strange sounds. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the chanting stopped. The family breathed a sigh of relief, but they knew that they could never let their guard down again. As the weeks turned into months, the Smiths started to lose hope. They had searched every inch of the woods and surrounding area, but there was no sign of little Timmy. They had no idea what had happened to him, and they were starting to lose their minds. And then, one night, the family was awoken by a strange noise coming from outside. They cautiously peered out the window, and what they saw was something out of a nightmare. There were figures moving in the woods, their bodies twisted and deformed. The Smiths watched in horror as the figures came closer to the cabin. Their skin was gray and stretched tight over their bones, their eyes sunken and lifeless. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, their movements almost mechanical. The family was frozen in fear as the figures started to surround the cabin. They could hear them scratching at the windows and pounding on the walls, trying to get inside. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the figures disappeared into the woods, leaving the Smiths shaken and terrified. They knew they had to leave the cabin, but they also knew that they couldn't leave without Timmy. They started to search again, this time more frantically than before. They searched every inch of the woods, calling out Timmy's name, but there was no response. And then, one day, they found a small cabin in the woods that they hadn't seen before. It was old and run down, the wood weathered and splintered. They cautiously approached the cabin, but as they got closer, they could hear strange sounds coming from inside. They pushed open the door, and what they saw made their blood run cold. The walls were covered in strange symbols and runes, and in the center of the room was a large, ornate doll. Its eyes seemed to follow them as they entered the room, and its porcelain skin gleamed in the dim light. The family felt a sense of unease wash over them as they looked at the doll. It was almost as if it was alive, and they couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching them. And then, they heard a faint sound coming from behind them. They turned to see Timmy, sitting in the corner of the room. He looked up at them, his eyes wide and filled with fear. The family rushed to his side, relieved to have found him at last. But as they tried to leave the cabin, they realized that they were trapped. The door wouldn't budge, and they could hear strange sounds coming from outside. The family was forced to spend the night in the cabin, huddled together in fear. They could hear strange whispers and voices coming from the darkness, and they knew that they were not alone. And then, in the morning, they were awoken by the sound of the doll moving. It had come to life, and its porcelain limbs were moving on their own. The family watched in horror as the doll started to speak, its voice low and gravelly. "I have been waiting for you," the doll said. "You have trespassed in my woods, and now you must pay the price." The family tried to run, but the doll was too fast. It chased them through the cabin, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the doll disappeared, leaving the family alone and terrified. The family eventually made it out of the woods, but they were never the same. They had witnessed something beyond their understanding, and they knew that they could never return to the cabin in the woods. The memory of their mysterious disappearance and the haunted doll would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As the night draws to a close, we bid farewell to the terrors that haunted us and the spine-tingling tales that kept us on the edge of our seats. Remember, the darkness may linger, but the dawn always brings a new light. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and never stop exploring the mysteries of the unknown.